So welcome to this lesson where we're going to start to develop the notifications page. So first of all, you'll notice that we have a submenu to the left and the main content to the right. Now what I want to do is develop this layout so that I can reuse it again. The reason being is because we have a similar sort of layout for the events and also for the event page as well. So for both these pages, they have a similar type of layout with the menu to the left and then the main content to the right. And so that is why we're going to develop this in such a way that we can reuse the code. So now that we've established that, what I want to go ahead and do is show you the directory first of all for the notifications page. So everything is set up exactly the same as everything else has been set up previously, but however, don't forget we have the small_profile.jpg in the same directory so that we can place that image in all of these circles and also this circle and also these images down here as well. They're going to be exactly the same. They're all going to be that one image just to illustrate that we want an image there for somebody's profile. And also don't forget, you need to make sure that you open up script.js right here because we're going to need to be modifying this because we want to create the similar sort of code for the header, because if you remember when we went to the mobile responsive version we had the anchor that opened and closed the header. Well, we want the same thing for the sub menu right here, and so we're going to need to put in a little bit of JavaScript that's pretty much identical to the JavaScript that we've already written. Also, don't forget that we are going to be using a bit of the UI. So the UI involves that menu at the side with the search at the top and so forth. So we're also going to open up the nav_list.scss file because we'll need to change a few of the default styling of the UI. So now let's take a look at developing the notifications page. So now that we have the notifications.php file open, I first of all want to target the HTML tag and I want to add on the ID attribute and we're going to say notifications. So this way I can style the page up using this ID and then targeting all the child elements. And then also what I can do is below the header I want to create a div element with the ID of col2. So this div element is going to wrap around two other div elements and they represent the two columns. One for the side menu and the other one on the right hand side is going to contain the content. So the first one, which is going to be on the left hand side, is going to be a div and I'm going to give it the ID of menu_side. And so that will contain that menu, and then obviously below there we want another div element. And I don't need to give this div an ID or a class because we don't technically need to. But however, if I want to put in some custom styles here for this specific content, then I do need to put an identifier or a class and so forth that I can target with CSS. So I'm just going to say ID and we're going to set this to notes. Again, this is specific for this page. But however, what I can do now is save this and let's style this up first of all before we continue making our DOM more complex. We're going to do this in nice little bite-sized steps so that we understand what we're doing here. So now let's open up the SCSS file for the notifications. Now, it's very important to note that we're going to style everything up, but then we're going to move the styles that are required to create the layout into the import.scss because the import.scss file contains the global styles. But for right now, we want to concentrate on this page, getting it styled up, and then worry about the structure later. So once I've gone ahead and done that, what I want to do is take a look at targeting the main div that's wrapping around the other two divs. So we target the ID col2. So firstly what we're going to do is say display as a table. And I'll explain why later on when we start styling the child divs to this element. Then also I want to set the position to absolute. The reason being is because when you set the height to 100%, what it's going to do is go to 100% of the height of the browser, which is absolutely fine. And position absolute has no pre-requirements, unlike the relative positioning, because if you wanted to 100% of the height with a relative positioned div, you'd have to set the HTML and the body's height to 100% in order to achieve that. But position absolute just gets on with it and says, okay, the height's going to be 100%. Now, the only other thing that we need to think about is the fact that when you set the height to 100%, is it factoring in the header right here? And the answer is no. But when you set the position to absolute, it's actually going to overlap over the top of the header. So that way, the table will actually be 100% of the height and you won't get any scroll bars. So you've saved yourself that hassle. Now, the only other thing that you need to think about is when it overlaps the header, you won't be able to click on any of the anchors inside of the header. And so that's going to cause a major problem. Also, if the header was to get shrunk down, you have the main link at the top, and then of course it opens and closes the header div. The header div is not, again, going to be able to be selected because the position absolute is going to be over the top of it. So again, what we need to do is think about the Z index. Now, every relatively positioned element is on the index of 0. So we don't want this on 0, we want this on -1. That way it will go underneath the header, which is got the positioning of relative. So that's what we're doing right here, is we're taking our main div and we're pushing it below the header when we set the Z index to -1. Then I'm going to say float to the left. So again, I don't want any spacing anomalies, and I also want it to wrap around the child elements correctly. So again, I'm just going to say float to the left to save me any hassle via, little CSS anomalies and bugs. Then I want to set the width to 100%. I absolutely want it to go all the way across, and the height to be 100%, don't forget. And then after that, what I want to do is set the padding top to 50 pixels. The reason being is because if we now have a table that's 100% of the browser's width and height, the content will go below the actual header for the nested div elements. So what we need to do is put on the padding top right here to push the child elements down. And so that's very important that we actually put that in. So I'm going to say padding top 50 pixels, just like so. Now this is going to cause the same exact problem where we're going to get scroll bars again because we've set the height to 100% and then we've added 50 pixels onto it. So again, we're going to get the same situation when we have the scroll bars. So what's the solution? Box sizing. So what I'm going to do is say @include box sizing. So now it will factor in the padding when we set the width and the height. And in this case, it's factoring in the padding top when we set the height. So now that we've done that, I can save this now and hit refresh. And when we actually inspect this and view the boundaries, you'll notice we're not getting any scroll bars. This is perfectly positioned. And you can see there we have that padding top, which is the yellow bit. We can still click on all of these anchors. Everything is still visible. That's really nice. And of course, when we start to put in a bit of content, so let's just do that right now. In here, because we've got the padding top on there, you'll notice now the content starts just below the header. Exactly what we wanted. So now that we've gone ahead and done that, the next thing I need to do is take a look at these child divs. So these two child div elements are going to be displayed as a table cell. And the reason being is because obviously we want them to keep the same height and we want sort of the same table structure. It's very important. So what I'm going to do is target the ID col2, and then I'm going to target all of the div elements that are a direct child of the element with the ID. So again, be specific here because you could have divs inside of divs and then you start affecting things. So just make sure you're very precise here. And then what I want to do is first of all display it as a table cell. Then also I want to set the vertical alignment to the top. The reason being is because by default it's set to the middle. Again, it can't always be guaranteed, but it's pretty much set to the middle. And so when I add content in here, it's all going to be aligned up in the center. But what I want it to do is all the content to be lined up on that very top edge. Then also I want to set the height to 100%, and that way it will guarantee that everything stays to the same height as the parent, which is being displayed as a table. And so what I can do now is very quickly just put in a little bit of content on each, and just go ahead and save this and hit refresh. And now you'll notice the content is right up at the top, which is what I wanted. And you have both your divs right there with the same height and so forth. But what we need to do now is actually take a look at styling up this menu underscore side div, because we need to limit its width. It needs to be a lot smaller, preferably 300 pixels as we have right here. And then the rest of it can be filled up. And also it's important to note that if you don't tell this to display as a table, which is the main parent, you'll notice what happens straight away. The columns right here no longer fill the height up, and they no longer fill the width up of the parent. So that is why I've told the parent to display as a table. So you can see what's happening right there. So now let's target that ID, which is menu underscore side. And then we want to set the width to 300 pixels and set the background color to brown. Once we do that, go ahead and save it and hit refresh. And now you'll notice that it's changed to that size and the other div element is filling up the rest of the space. So the next thing I want to do is take a look at putting in the markup that's needed in order to generate that menu, which, as you know, is part of the UI. So let's go ahead and flick on over, and what we're going to do is simply delete out this content right here. So what we're going to do first of all is put in an anchor, and this anchor isn't going to go anywhere. But however, this anchor is only going to show on low resolution devices such as smartphones and tablets, and what it will do is it will toggle open and closed the menu. And inside of there we want a span, and that's going to be an icon, and again we're using the Liger font, and then I'm just going to say notifications right there for the actual text. So now it's time to put in the menu below there. So we have the div. Now we're going to have an ID on here for the sake of JavaScript, so it's going to be sub underscore menu. Then also we need a class putting on here, which is going to be UI underscore search list. Then inside of there, what we want is the span. So the span again is going to be an icon, and we're going to have the left bracket, and then we're also going to have the other span, which is going to be the search icon. So the first span is going to be this arrow, and the second span is the search icon. Then also we have the input, and we're going to have a pre-placed value in here. So I'm just going to say value, and it's going to be search. And you could also do placeholder text in there if you wanted to, but I'm just going to keep it simple. And then on top of that, what we need to do is create an unordered list with the class UI underscore nav list. Then inside of there, we're obviously going to have a list item. Inside of each list item, we're going to have an anchor that wraps around the content. So first of all, we have the image, and that small underscore profile image is going to be used just as a filler image to fill in those circles, and the alt attribute is just going to be person's name, and then we're just going to close that off. Then also below that, what we're going to do is have the paragraph element, and the paragraph element again consists of a few spans for our icons. So let's go ahead and take a look at the actual text right now. So you'll be able to see that what we can do is simply copy out this text, and then we can paste it below. So we have the first line, and then what we want to do is bring it down onto a new line. So I'm going to create a line break right there. Then the next thing is we have the icon, which is the speech bubble icon, and then we have the clock icon right there. So the lowercase s is the speech bubble icon, just like so. Let's just delete that out. And then we have the comma, which is going to be the clock icon. So I can say span and put that inside of there. So now that we've done that, what I can do is take a look at just very quickly saving this and previewing it in the browser. So you can see here that the spans look a little bit messed up. Obviously we don't want that link showing up just yet. And I also want to duplicate this a few times. And again, there are a few problems in here. For example, we've got box shadows and there's quite a few other problems as well. But we won't complicate things right now. We'll just save this as is and we'll leave it there, and join me in the next lesson where we'll continue on developing the notifications page.